Hi, this is Casey, and today I'm making another cooking video. We are going to do penne with roasted butternut squash, goat cheese, and prosciutto. And this is a one-dish meal that's really great for when you have friends over or family, or just when you want a comforting fall meal. My stepmom made this for us about a year ago, and since then we've made changes to it, and now we make it all the time. And it's one of our favorite dinners, so I'm really excited to share it with you. Here we go. So the first thing that we're going to do is start by cutting our red onion into pretty large chunks. So I like to start by just cutting off both ends, and we'll throw these in our compost bowl. And then you just want to chop your onion in half and peel off the skin from both sides. And then we can just give this a couple of chops like that, and a few chops like that, and this will go into a big bowl. And now we'll do this side as well. There you go. So now that we have our red onion chopped up in here, we're going to start with the butternut squash. And this is going to also be cut into pretty large chunks. We'll start by cutting off both ends, and then we'll break it into smaller pieces. So you want to be really careful when you're cutting a squash like this. It's important to have a super sharp knife, and I like to cut it just into sections and then deal with the smaller sections. It just is a little bit easier. Like so. And then I just like to take each piece of squash and just cut around the outside to remove the skin, and then we'll cut it into bite-sized chunks. They don't have to be perfect, just something like that, and they'll get tossed right into the bowl with the red onion. Now when you get to the larger pieces, like the center of the squash that has the seeds, I just use a spoon and scrape them out, just like when you're carving a pumpkin, like so. And we'll scoop these into our compost. And then you'll just want to cut the skin off and chop it into small pieces like we did with the neck of the squash. So now I'm just chopping up the last piece of butternut squash. Just a quick rough chop, and we'll toss that into the bowl. Then finally, the last thing that we have to do is 1 head of garlic, and you're just going to take the flat part of your knife and give it a couple of good whacks. Uh-oh, I think I lost a couple of garlic cloves. So then you're just going to take the whole cloves with the paper on and toss them into the bowl with the butternut squash and the red onion. So essentially they'll just be little roasted garlic cloves once we're done with them. Sure we get them all. Great. There we go. Now we're ready to get our stuff in the oven. So I've just set our oven to preheat to 375, and now we're going to get our main ingredients for the pasta dish ready. In this bowl we have our chunks of red onion, butternut squash, and our garlic cloves with the paper on. So the first thing that we're going to do is add about a teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper. You can just kind of eyeball it. It doesn't need to be perfect. You can put more or less if you prefer. There we go. And then we're going to do about 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt, which is a big pinch or two. Or if you're a Julia child, it's more like a fistful. And finally, we're going to do about 1/4 cup of extra virgin olive oil. And you can eyeball it or measure it, whatever you're comfortable with. Perfect. And we're just going to use our hands and toss it all together. And make sure all of it's coated really well so it doesn't stick too badly to the cookie sheet. And then we'll just dump it all out on here. Spread it out to give it some space. And then we're going to get this in the oven. So now we're just going to pop our veggies here in the oven that's been preheated to 375, and they're going to cook for about an hour. But every 20 minutes you're going to want to scrape them up off the bottom of the pan and toss them around because we want them to caramelize really evenly. So maybe every 20 minutes just check on them and toss them, and they should cook for about an hour and 15 minutes, and then they'll be ready to go into the final dish. So now all of our veggies are done roasting. You can see they're nice and caramelized. And I'm just going to set this here. I've just put on some water to boil, and once that is ready, then we can get our pasta in the water and our dinner will almost be finished. So our veggies have just been kind of cooling off sitting here, and our water has come to a boil. So we're going to salt it. So just put a good pinch of salt, probably about half a tablespoon in. And then we're going to toss in our pasta. I am using a pasta that's called trenne, which is shaped just like penne, which is probably what you could find at the grocery store. This is from a specialty market, and they're just like triangular shaped penne, so I thought they'd be kind of fun for this dish, but you could use penne or rigatoni as well. We'll dump about a pound in. And then I was advised with this particular pasta to stir it for a good amount of time because of the flat sides of this pasta. They tend to stick together. So I'll just stand here and stir them for a little bit until they really get cooking. So our pasta is done cooking. It's al dente, which means it just has a little bite in the center, but it's totally cooked through. So we want to reserve some of the starchy pasta water that we're going to use to help the goat cheese bind to the pasta. Just pull out a cup. You won't need that much, but it's better to have more before you dump it. And now we're just going to drain our pasta. We're ready to make our dinner. So we are going to put our pasta, which we've drained, back into our large bowl. And then we're going to take about 5 ounces, so about half of this, goat cheese. And just squeeze this directly into the pasta, and it's going to form basically the pasta sauce for this dish. There we go. I'm just going to grab a spoon and start tossing this around with the hot pasta so it starts to melt and coat the pasta. And then this is where the reserved starchy pasta water comes in handy. You're just going to drizzle a bit on, a little bit at a time, and stir. And you can use your spoon to break up the goat cheese into little chunks, and it'll melt pretty quickly. So now our pasta is really nice and coated with the goat cheese. And I only ended up using about 1/4 cup of the pasta water, but it's just nice to have extra on hand in case you need it. So the next thing we're going to do is add our butternut squash, red onion, and garlic cloves. So first thing you've got to do is take all your little garlic cloves and peel the skin off. And inside you have a perfect little roasted garlic. So these are just going to get all tossed in here. These little roasted garlics smell so good. Sometimes the paper kind of sticks just because of the way that they've been roasting in the pan, but just work with it a little bit. So all of our garlic cloves have been peeled and tossed in the pasta, and now we can just scrape all of our other delicious caramelized veggies in as well. Make sure you get any little crisp bits off the bottom of the cookie sheet. Now we're just going to gently toss this all together, and if it starts to stick like mine is, you want to add a little bit more pasta water. I like to add prosciutto to this dish. It could definitely be a completely vegetarian meal, but the prosciutto does add a nice salty quality to the pasta dish. So this one is called speck, and it's a smoked northern Italian version of prosciutto, and then here I have just the more classic prosciutto. And you could use either of these. If you live here in the Gorge, I got the speck from Ovino Market, as well as the Trenne pasta, if you wanted to recreate this exactly. So I'm going to use the speck for this, just because I wanted to try something different with the smoked flavor. So this is already in pretty small pieces, so I'm just going to tear it a little bit and toss it in. So I'm nearly done here adding the speck. And we'll save this prosciutto for another dish. And finally, we're going to just add some fresh basil. So I've just given this basil a quick rinse, and I'm going to chiffonade it, which just means to cut it into little strips. So one way to do that is to just stack all your little pieces of basil, like so. This is probably good. And then I'm just going to use a really sharp knife here and cut off the stems, and then you just roll the basil, and you end up with perfect little ribbons. And it's really easy, so then we're just going to toss this right into our dish. So my daughter Gwyneth woke up from her nap again as I'm finishing up. Just going to plate this food here. And just make sure you get some of everything on each plate. You want to make sure you get some of the garlic cloves, lots of the prosciutto, and lots of the butternut squash, and lots of the pasta, of course. And I really like to finish this pasta dish with just a little drizzle of honey. It really brings out the sweetness in the butternut squash and sort of really complements the saltiness of the prosciutto and the goat cheese. So just a little drizzle. And this honey happens to be from my dad's bees, but you can get awesome organic honey at the local markets or the grocery store as well. Okay, so finally, we're going to do beer and wine pairings again that are local from here in the Gorge. To start with, I asked my husband to talk a little bit about the strong blonde Belgian beer from Frame Brewing.
Yeah, Frame Brewing is the newest brewery in Hood River. They just opened up and they're making some excellent beer. Brewer Josh likes to make a nice, clean, and balanced beer. And so this strong Belgian blonde is a good representation of the style. It's really fruity and crisp, and is a really easy drinking for the amount of alcohol that's in it. Highly recommended.
And since the wine is totally my department, I have the Cuvée Elena from Syncline, which is their blend. This is the 2010, which comes out in September. And it's a really bold blend. It's a big wine. It's delicious. It has lots of deep berry flavors and would be a really cozy complement to this dinner for fall. And then for a white, this is the Lizzie from Anice. And I love this wine. It's got a lot of pear flavor to it, and it's almost tastes like a sparkling wine. It's really bright and wonderful. So this would almost sort of break up the richness of this dish, where the Cuvée Elena from Syncline would kind of just complement the cozy aspect of this dinner. So we know Gwyneth likes it because she already ate a ton of this pasta. But I need some garlic clove. That's all right too. There you go. You want some pasta? There you go. This is Casey from Gorge in the Gorge and a Collection of Passions. We'll see you next time.